Today morning we've got a distinguished guest with us, Mr. Harsh Mander. Thank you for giving us time, and I must thank you, the Museum of Goa, also to facilitate all these things. Welcome to Goa.
Thank you so much.
I want to first start with we all follow your work, we read your books, you inspire us so many times. I'm glad that we could have this conversation.
My pleasure.
I want to ask you about like 10 years back that Karwan-e-Mohabbat have started?
2017.
Yeah, 17. Please tell us a little bit more about it. I want to ask you started from Assam and few states you have covered, and where is that process now?
See, the Karwan-e-Mohabbat, caravan of love, literally. I saw India changing before my eyes, and we've had recurring incidents of communal violence right from partition onwards. But this phenomenon of hate lynching, very much like Jim Crow's America.
True.
It had begun, and it's grown into a kind of epidemic. And I was alarmed by many things, but first is the extent of hate, but also what is the response of the rest of us?
True.
If you look at, say, Nazi Germany, I realize now that the horror of Nazi Germany was not simply the evil leadership of Hitler. It was ordinary people and their support and their silences. And so the Karwan-e-Mohabbat was, attempting to respond to this campaign of hate. And also learning from Gandhiji that you cannot fight hate with hate. If you fight hate with hate, it only gets deeper.
Yes.
So it's fighting hate with the politics of love, in a sense.
Okay.
So what did Gandhiji do during the last months of his life, which were the most painful years of his life, months of his life, I think, but also the most significant in some ways, because he showed us what we need to do when the country exploded with hate. 1 million Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs killed each other.
Yeah.
No, killed each other. And in the middle of that, he walked firstly to Noakholi, and went to the home of every person who had been hit by hate violence. And tried to bring peace. He went to Bihar and did the same, went from house to house. And then when India got her freedom, he was actually not in Delhi, he was in Calcutta trying to stem the hatred and the non-stop violence. So I made a call saying that we would go to the home of every single person who's been lynched anywhere in the country.
Okay.
But we would not go as human rights workers or as fact finders, or we would go like you would go to a loved one who has suffered this way. You would go and we would sit with the family, we would grieve with the family, and we would say four things to them, which was we want you to know that you're not alone, that there are people who share your pain. Second is that we feel ashamed, we seek forgiveness for what we have become as a people. And third, that we assure you that we will be with you whatever happens. We will be with you as you fight for justice, as you pick up the broken pieces of your life. We will not abandon you.
Okay.
And the fourth is that we will tell you a story. And I've learned that with decades of work with survivors of hate violence, the first thing they want is an acknowledgement that it happened.
That they have been harmed.
That they have been harmed. That's why the Truth Commission of South Africa was really a truth-telling. So we would tell your story with truth. So so that is what we set out to do. I had planned one journey, and we set off. I think it was September 2017.
Okay.
But it it had so much impact that it meant so much to people. It helped also break the silence around lynching across the country. But for the survivors, it meant a great deal. And so I said, we will continue. As long as hate continues, we will continue the caravan. And we made about, I think, 30 odd journeys. Every month we would set out.
Okay.
And are now engaged with about 100 families who've lost loved ones to lynching across the country. But and then the lockdown happened,
Right.
and in the lockdown, then we hadn't planned it, but the Karwa actually took on a kind of spontaneous role because we had people across the country to help people who were hit by the pandemic, the lockdown, hunger. We did something like 10 million meals, and we sort of, it became a kind of distress calling from all over, linking people, getting people home.
Got it.
So that was another task. And then when the lockdown, when COVID passed, we realized that hate violence hasn't ended. It's just that we've become even more indifferent to it. And so we're continuing the journeys. And it's sort of my major, it's the center of my life and work. And although there's huge government actions against me, it's become harder and harder to do this.
True.
But I'm determined. We made promises to the families, so now almost nobody is willing to fund because of pressures of the government. So I've just made a call to friends across the country.
For the fundraising?
People send money. So like these pensions have to go out every month. We have to help the children go through school.
True.
We need to fight the legal cases. So all of that continues. So the karma continues because hate violence continues.
Okay. True.
And so also Manipur. So all of that is.
By now, maybe you have got several chapters across the states who are working with you, like a decentralized kind of.
Absolutely.
So,
So it's a spontaneous kind of. It's not an organization. It's a camp. I see it as a movement of radical love.
True. Which is so much needed in this polarized society.
Polarized society.
Secondly, I would also like to ask you, you were involved in so many working groups, starting from National Advisory Council once upon a time, which has not got renewed, and to disability movements, then homelessness, urban poverty and all this stuff. You have seen from A to Z of the advisory councils work, how they work, and how far do you think we have gone? What is the progress that you have seen towards the equality? What the ideals of all those advisory councils? What is your say on that?
See, I think that even with the last government, the National Advisory Council was, in a sense, a counterforce to the larger consensus of neoliberal capitalism. So the framework of even the last government was neoliberal, which was primarily dependent on global market forces working. But there was, a recognition that they also needs a kind of floor of, what I think of it like a floor of human dignity below which no one should be allowed to fall.
True.
And for that you have to build up a system. It was the sort of the beginning of a construction of a kind of notion of a welfare state.
True.
Where you get this as a right. It's not that somebody is doing charity to you. What has happened after after this government has changed from 2014, I think the idea of rights, of social rights, has completely gone. Instead, we're being converted from citizens increasingly into subjects.
Subjects, yes.
Yeah. So the great sort of strong man from above will, give you. It's a personal act of, benevolence of the supreme leader, which you have to receive with gratitude. So even when bags of grain are given, it's with the picture of Mr. Modi and so on. So the idea of the state having duties to citizens to fulfill their social rights as a duty of the state, not as a benevolence, a voluntary benevolence of the state, of the state leader.
The perspective is shifting.
Has completely shifted.
Yeah.
And I think that the pandemic was a moment where all of this became
visible.
I mean, dramatically visible.
True.
And what we saw then was the consequences of the kind of inequality that we have accepted. I mean, just to give one dramatic example, during the lockdown, when almost 97-98% of people were hit badly, the economy contracted. The wealth of one man, Mr. Adani, increased 10 times during the lockdown.
Got it.
And it's hard to imagine. He briefly became the second wealthiest man in the world. How much wealth he had, my friend who's an economist, Andres, says that if 100 people work at statutory wages, how long would they take to get the wealth that Mr. Adani had?
Few lifetimes maybe?
1 million years.
Wow.
So you're looking at inequality has gone, we've gone from crony capitalism into a much closer to the Russian oligarchy kind of system. Inequality has grown massively. The state's sense of a duty to the citizen as rights, to ensure health care, to ensure education, to ensure a whole range of public goods, has dwindled further. So I think the crisis of our times, on the one hand, is of rising hate, but the other is of extreme inequality.
Where participatory democracy is failing majorly.
Failing majorly. Amartya Sen actually said something quite interesting, that he said that it's often said that India and China are almost equally unequal.
Okay.
But he said that the penalty, what he calls the penalty of inequality, is much greater in India. Because if I'm in the bottom 10% in China,
yes,
I can still be sure that when my child falls sick, there's a public hospital that she can go to, that she will have a decent school where she can go to, etc. The bottom 10% in India is very far from that assurance.
Yeah.
So the penalty of inequality is so much greater in India, and that inequality is only growing further and further. So rising hate and dizzyingly rising hate and dizzyingly rising inequality are the twin crises of our time.
Got it. So again, coming back to when we were talking about the last 10%, I know that the last mile accessibility is like almost non-existent. That is there. And you, in this new book of burning of yours, like Burning Pyres, Mass Graves, and how state did fail its people, you spoke about that kind of lack of public health infrastructure and the public distribution systems. You've come up with hard facts about that. Also, towards the end of the book, you have mentioned about that how grieving is necessary, how collective grieving helps people accountable, and how the memories will act as an aggregator for, you know, to looking up to the values that we are losing. Please tell us something about that.
See, actually, it's extraordinary. This is the biggest humanitarian crisis that our country has seen over several generations. We've lost, according to global estimates, perhaps 5 million lives. But we seem to have just, it's completely forgotten. We had elections recently. This was not even part of the discourse.
Like kind of a cover up. It's like full of apathy. It seems like
it's an enforced amnesia to which all of us, in which all of us participate. And I've said it's a public duty to remember, not to forget. If we are to ensure that this doesn't happen again, it was in 1892 that we had the Great Bombay Plague.
Yes.
A colonial administrator at that time had written that if we have to ensure that this never happens again, we have to ensure 2 things for every citizen in every city, he said, and they come completely free. This is a colonial administrator. And those 2 things are clean air and clean water. And look at, this is, he said in 1892, look at Bombay and look at Dharavi and look at all of this. When more than 100 years ago, when we had the Spanish flu, India again had lost the largest number of lives. And Nirala, the poet, he was it happened, he lost most of his family. And in his memory, he writes about bodies floating in the Ganga. And I say, 100 years later, we are seeing bodies floating in the Ganga. We are not learning, and which is why we must remember. But I do say that the first thing we should do when we remember is to grieve. We have to, at least every one of those 5 million lives should get the dignity at least of our grief. That every life is of value and therefore every life is grievable. And starting off, and I say that I must remember first to grieve and then to rage, because a large part of the lives that were lost should not have been lost, need not have been lost.
True.
So I must grieve, I must rage, and then I say, but I also must find reasons of hope because of the acts of kindness, particularly, that I saw across the country by ordinary citizens. And with my grief, with my rage, with my hope, how can I imagine a better future? How can we build a better future? And public health was the most dramatic reality that came out. I mean, 8 out of 10 doctors in India, after many people have already migrated to the US, etc., only 2 work for public health. Only 2 public hospitals. The rest,
this is the statistics now.
This is the statistics. 8 out of 10 work for either corporate hospitals or their own private practice. Now, with this tiny, we have one of the most privatized healthcare systems in the world. So that's one part of the story. But we also found workers had no protection whatsoever. I mean, you could, the Prime Minister said work from home. I mean, I can work from home if I'm assured that somebody is going to pay my salary. as a daily wage worker, mostly I don't even have an identifiable employer. He has no obligations to me. So he just abandons you. And that's 9 out of 10 workers.
Even the ASHA workers didn't get their salaries. They don't get their equipment, safety equipment.
And that's within the government. And so I feel that probably the two biggest lessons, if you have to learn from the pandemic, the first is public health. That we must have a public system of public provisioning of equitable, decent healthcare from primary healthcare upwards, which requires a massive expansion of public investment in health. The second for me is labor rights. I mean, that we cannot have workers completely unprotected by any kind of legislation or support. And the third actually is to do with going back to what he said after the Bombay plague. We have to have, decent living conditions for people, clean air, clean water, etc. So, why I felt I must write this book is that, is to plead for us to learn from it.
Okay.
And but I also talk a lot in my book about people, because it was not just the state that failed us. The kind of what did hospitals do, private hospitals do? Everybody was profiteering. Adil Poonawala vaccine, he said, pandemic is a time to make super profits. And he made super profits, and he entered the 10 richest people in the country, etc. But it wasn't just them. Anyone, firewood for lighting, cremations, it really shot up. Yeah, ambulance drivers, medicines of even ordinary medicines, right from paracetamol was selling in black. So all of us, the large majority of us really failed our people. And I think that, I can deal with a state that failed us. I can't deal with the people who failed each other.
But it's a reflection.
It's a reflection of what we have become as a people. And so it is for that introspection that I believe that we must remember. We must.
True. Yeah. I think we're coming to an end of this conversation. I want to ask you the last comment on it. Like you talked about grief, and then rage, and then hope.
Yeah.
And I hope the pandemic doesn't return again and stuff. But what are the steps would you like to advise the government or advise the people, the policymakers, to take in case in the future to like minimize the harm that has happened?
There's a great deal. I mean, let me just since I end the book with that.
Yes,
so
please.
So let me. I'll just find. So for in India to be truly equal and free, injustice and apathy would have to be replaced with universal justice and compassion. I call this a place of kindness, a place in which people of privilege reject and fight any policy that offers them protection, safety and opportunities, but blocks these to others. A place where we do not have 8 out of 10 doctors, including many educated with taxpayers' money, working for the for-profit private health system, etc. So imagine a country which has secured free and quality public health care for every citizen, a guarantee of food for all, workers' rights to social security and wage payments to all, and decent ventilated housing and clean water for all. In this place of kindness, if a pandemic like COVID-19 were to hit us again, there would be so many things we would do differently. We would never impose lockdowns except as a last resort. And when we do fall back on this recourse, these should be local, targeted, planned carefully and sensitively to ensure that the most disadvantaged people are able to cope and survive. All workers outside the formal economy must be paid minimum wages for as long as the lockdown. and its downstream impacts last, along with free rations. We would protect small and medium businesses with grants by waiving loans. There'd be arrangements to reach cooked food, cooked meals, provisions and medicines to older people, people with disability and people living in isolation and quarantine. We would empty jails of all people serving time for less serious crimes as well as all political prisoners. Schools would be the last to shut and the first to open, and as far as possible students would learn in the safety of open spaces and be nourished by school meals all through the calamity. For healthcare, I would nationalize for the period of the pandemic private health services, and every trained health hand in every hospital bed would now become, would not run for private profit, but would join the national mainstream for fighting the pandemic equitably, and so on. So this is the kind. Also, I think very importantly, patents would be suspended, and there would be compulsory licensing to ensure that there are enough quantities of free vaccines and essential medicines at reasonable prices available to all.
True. I hope the policymakers would give a heed to this advices. Thank you for your time, Mr. Mander. It was great talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Keep inspiring us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My pleasure.